Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Earthly Headlines. Yesterday I mentioned that I would talk about prehistoric cave art and how it reveals ancient human knowledge about the cosmos and constellations in the sky by using local animals as a marker or an image reference, so to speak, to point out certain parts of the visible cosmos and the visible stars from the Earth's plane, from the Earth's viewing platform, so to speak. And this article came out that kind of explains this, because it had been long speculated that these weren't just depictions of animals, that they were just randomly doodling, but there, in addition to animals, they were showing like decapitated human head, corpse with some sort of animal and some other imagery. And it had been long speculated that this was symbolic of something else, and these weren't just, again, random doodles or anything like that. And they concluded some of the analysis, and they're able to prove with certain algorithms and other technology that we'll get into, that it's more than likely that the ancients were referring to the changing star system around them, and they knew, and it definitely points to their ancient knowledge of precession and other things like that. And we'll get into all that right now. They came to the conclusion that the ancient people really did have a relatively advanced knowledge of astronomy, contrary to popular belief. Even though it was speculated, in academia, a lot of people aren't, when they have like a cutting edge idea that goes against the grain, if they're entrenched in academia, more likely than not, they don't want to go out on a limb and stake their reputation on the line and get attacked. I'm not saying everybody's like that. Obviously, there are scholars out there who are in it for their scholarly endeavors, but there are others who aren't inclined as such. And I think this is one of those, or it was one of those fringe topics at the time. But now it's the opinions turning in the scientific community. So they came across this artwork at all these different sites in Europe, like Lascaux cave. A lot of them are in France, actually, and I think there's some in Spain, Germany. So they came to the animal symbols represent star constellations in the night sky and are used to represent dates and mark events such as comet strikes. So that's the big deal. Marking events such as comet strikes. I mentioned this yesterday. It seemed like they were using the stars. They had an elaborate system of timekeeping, and they would mark down using some sort of imagery, like I mentioned earlier, the decapitated human head, or a human carcass, to mark these cosmic instances of comet strikes or celestial activity that happens to affect Earth, hence the decapitated human. So it basically, they extrapolated that image as a cutting off point for civilization, where civilization gets literally cut down, just like in Sodom in yesterday's video. And they mark it, and they seem to have been able to predict when this is going to happen again, suggesting that we're caught in some sort of orbital loop, and we have to cross this bombardment of interstellar objects every so often, and they seem to have mapped this out in imagery. So as far back as 40,000 years ago, humans kept track of time using knowledge of how the position of the stars slowly changed over thousands of years. So they were making note of these incremental changes, which is what we know now as precession of the equinoxes. So their findings, the researchers' findings, suggest that ancient people understood an effect caused by the gradual shift of Earth's rotational axis, which is called precession. And it was accredited to Hipparchus before the ancient Greeks, who lived during Hellenistic Greece, I think around between 300 to 100 BC, around there, after Alexander conquered everything. Hipparchus came from, I want to say, Nicaea, and he was credited for this observation, but really he was just drawing on some older and ancient knowledge. We're talking about the ancient Greeks here. I mean, they were really advanced for sure. I mean, mathematics, sciences, you name it. but they also had access that we no longer really are aware of in the form of like passed down knowledge, mainly from Egypt. They say that when the Greeks encountered the Egyptians, that the Greeks didn't colonize Egypt, really. Maybe they did in the physical realm, but Egyptians actually conquered the Greeks in the intellectual sense, meaning that the Greeks were passed on this esoteric ancient knowledge, and it's no surprise that some of that knowledge included this precession of the equinoxes that was credited to the Greeks, mainly because that's where most of the evidence is, like the hard evidence. But it's very clear that the Greeks got their knowledge from an older civilization. I mean, Plato's talks about it, Socrates has talked about it. A lot of these famous Greek orators knew about this. So it's no surprise that this goes back 40,000 years, or whenever the cave paintings were illustrated. Again, this number 40,000 years comes up, and that's about the time when the Neanderthals became extinct. That's about the time that the Denisovan more than likely crossed over the Tibetan Plateau, and maybe even before mankind settled Western Europe. Not sure. They probably had already did, though, if I had to guess. These people living back then had the ability to define dates to within 250 years, just using the stars and observation. By the way, this is a type of knowledge that gets passed down from generation to generation, because observing something as massive as the cosmos is a long game, so to speak. That's why when we found out what the Mayans were up to and they had that calendar, it was such a mind blow, because the Mayans, as far as Western scholarly academia is concerned, the Mayans aren't that old. And they had this huge repository of astronomical knowledge. Anyway, it just goes to show you that the huge scope of this study is constantly ongoing, especially if you don't have technology like the telescopes that we have now, like the Hubble. If you didn't have that, you just had dead reckoning. I mean, unless there was a telescope way back when that just got lost in the sands of time. It's really incredible that they were aware enough to understand that this knowledge is important, and it's important to pass it down to the next generation to keep the train going, so to speak. The findings indicate that the astronomical insights of ancient people were far greater than previously believed. Their knowledge may have aided navigation of the open seas, with implications of our understanding of prehistoric human migration. This is the other thing. They found boats that date back to around 35,000 years ago, 40,000 years ago. And how did they have navigation? So this knowledge actually helps with that. No one's going to make a boat just to go out there, unless they know what they're dealing with, especially back then. So if they had the balls to create a raft or just some seagoing vessel and go, it's pretty safe to assume that they knew that where they were trying to get to. It wasn't just like even Columbus, when he discovered some of the islands south of North America, he thought he was going to India at the very least, or China. He had an idea of what was going on, and how did he get that idea? Well, he came across some knowledge that he used his own logic to put together and have the balls enough to ask for money and go across the Atlantic. So the same case should be assumed with these people, because they had navigation, because with astronomy comes navigation. It's just a natural progression. So Göbekli Tepe is mentioned too, because they also had some animal imagery and symbols in modern day Turkey. So a lot of these were representing star constellations, and then some of them marked dates, like the age of Aquarius and the age of Leo, and their comet strikes that were suggested by these pillars. And remember, there's probably way more, because Göbekli Tepe is not even 90% fully excavated, something crazy like that. Like there's way more underneath the surface that they haven't even found. So, but what we have unearthed contains this imagery. So these researchers, they were studying Neolithic art and Paleolithic art in Turkey, Spain, France, and Germany. All the sites use the same method of date keeping based on sophisticated astronomy, even though the art was separated by time in tens of thousands of years. So we have this consistent method throughout the millennia of basically timekeeping. So they're using the same technique. I don't think that's a coincidence. It must have been some elite or widespread global knowledge, like following the North Star or something like that. It must have been that common if these techniques are being seen all throughout the ages. In this article, they say Göbekli Tepe is interpreted as a memorial to a devastating comet strike around 11,000 BC, which led to the Younger Dryas, or initiated the Younger Dryas. I think that's part of it. But I don't think, again, there's not a lot unearthed from Göbekli Tepe. It's not 100% unearthed. So it can't, I mean, obviously there should be interpretations based on what we have, but I don't think it was just a memorial. I mean, come on, it's a giant complex. So, I mean, we'll see in the coming years what else is under there, hopefully. And then the Lascaux caves I mentioned earlier features a dying man and several animals, and it commemorates another comet strike around 15,200 BC, which is near the height of the last ice age, pretty close. I think the height of the last ice age was about between 20,000 to like 16,000 years, so this isn't too far off. But they were making note if something entered the Earth's atmosphere, like such as a comet, they made sure, because I mean, at night, that's all they look at, right? Is the night sky, I'm assuming, and there's no light pollution, so things must have been way brighter and way more noticeable, even with the naked eye back then. And if something out of the ordinary happens in the sky, they're gonna, they had people to mark that down and mark down any anomalies. It was almost like they were on the telephone with the heavens every night, and they took it seriously. Now people, especially people who live in cities, they don't really look at the sky at all. That's why I go to the desert all the time, is just so I can just maintain some sort of connection. Because if you do go out and look at the stars at night with no light pollution and preferably no moon to obscure some of the stars, it's definitely, and if you're at altitude as well, like the high desert or top of a mountain, I think it's at least one time in your life is worth looking at, just to have a glimpse of what the ancients were looking at, because it's the same sky. So the team compared the age of many examples of cave art. So they chemically dated the paints, and then they compared that with the positions of the stars in ancient times, and then they came out with they fed it into this software, and then it showed what the likely dates were, what the sky looked like when the ancients painted those in those caves. This is a picture of the Lion Man from Hohenstein Stadel Cave. He's about 40,000 years old or something like that, and he represents also a constellation in the night sky. 38,000 BC is Lion Man. He also represented this ancient timekeeping system, and I mean, look at this. The Lion Man is incredible. 38,000 years old, and he's an anthropomorphic being, and I'd be hard pressed to be able to do this myself. So they were so in tune with the sky that they incorporated that knowledge into their culture by constructing things like this guy, and I'm sure there's a bunch of other ones out there that we haven't found. And yeah, the Lion Man is, I'm assuming, from Germany. So what do you guys think about this? Do you guys think this is hooey? Is this just a coincidence? Is this cave art just doodles? Or is this some sort of advanced knowledge that predates us and goes back into the last ice age and further back into the Pleistocene, do you think there was some intellectual elite that only had this knowledge, or do you think it was more tribal and everyone was in on it and everyone had an idea of what the heavens may have been and how they interpreted it? Like, was it a communal thing, or again, was it an esoteric? I don't know if it was. If you had to ask me, I don't know. There's no way of knowing, obviously. I don't know. Who knows if there was an elite that just specialized in this knowledge and didn't share it with anybody else, or if they did, they kind of gave them a trickle-down effect. But I know that esoteric groups and religious groups in the recent past, like 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago, they had to keep stuff like this secret and hide them from people like the Romans and other groups that might have been a threat to them. And they had to, like Freemasons and secret societies. That stuff definitely exists, and it exists for a reason. But back then, I don't know if they were in that same mindset as to hide this knowledge or anything like that. I think it was more open because they were writing it all, they were painting it in caves and stuff like that. In any case, these findings support a theory of multiple comet impacts over the course of human development. Definitely revolutionizes how prehistoric populations are seen, just because they saw this stuff coming. If you ask the average person now, they don't know when the last comet impact was. They don't even think about it. It's not even in their sphere of consciousness. It just doesn't occur to them. But I think back then it was all like, it must have been a huge part of their daily life. Just because, like I said earlier, the night sky was a big part of prehistoric civilization and their culture. And that is undeniable now, because that is what makes up a lot of their surviving artwork. And what's art except just a window into your consciousness? It's like expression, basically, right? So let me know what you guys think about this article. I thought it was super interesting. I'm sorry if I ramble on a little bit too long. I'm still looking for your comments. I had a few from the last video, supportive comments and really cool observations. I'm looking for more. Please like and subscribe, share. I want to get the word out. So thank you so much for listening. I'll see you guys tomorrow.